me back in when I was 11, so you can see a nice before and after picture here. And so I was always like really into science. However, back then I was really into civil engineering. My dad was a civil engineer. He like did bridges and that type of stuff, and I was determined to be a civil engineer. And so of course I did all these different like research experiments on like dams and bridges and all sorts of stuff. And then I also did some like environmental water quality stuff, and things were going really great. And I was like super psyched about science, and then tragedy struck. You see, when I was 13 years old, a close family friend, who's like an uncle to me, passed away from pancreatic cancer. And when the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using Google and Wikipedia, I found a lot of different statistics on these cancers. But what I found really shocked me. You see, 85% of all pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late, when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. And I was wondering, why on earth are we so bad at detecting these cancers? And as I dug deeper into the research, I found an even more shocking statistic. There really was no test for pancreatic cancer. I mean, for breast cancer, we have the mammogram. For colon cancer, we have colonoscopies. But for pancreatic cancer, there really wasn't anything. I mean, the best test out there was a 6-year-old test. I mean, first off, that's older than my dad. But also, it costs $800 per test, and is grossly inaccurate, missing 30% of all cancers. Your doctor would have to be ridiculously suspicious that you have the disease in order to give you this test. And thus, the vast majority of these cancers go undiagnosed until it's far too late. So I was determined to change this, so I set out armed with 8th grade biology to change the face of cancer diagnostics. It's a bit lofty of a goal, but I was determined to do it, and my kind of rationale was the current test sucked so much that anything I do will probably be marginally better. So armed with this kind of go-getter attitude, I set out, and I found what a sensor for pancreatic cancer would really have to look like in order to be effective. It would have to be inexpensive, rapid, simple, sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. And I was pretty sure I could do this. I wasn't exactly sure how, so I kept researching, and that's when I found why we haven't updated our tests in over 6 decades. And that's because when we're looking for these cancers, we're looking at your bloodstream, particularly for these variations in protein levels. And while this sounds really straightforward, it's anything but. You know, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, this is great. I now can like detect pancreatic cancer. My biology teacher, I swear she has like eyes on the back of her head. She whirls around all red in the face, storms up to my desk, snatches this article, and is like, what is this actual science doing in my classroom? This is like the place for mundane regurgitation of knowledge, not actual science. At least that's what I thought she said. She probably said something more along the lines of, do your homework or else I'll fail you. However, after class, I finally went back, and I was like, I had to beg for my article back. I had to listen to this 30-minute long lecture about respecting myself and others. All I really wanted was my article. Finally got back, and that's when I started researching this idea. And it's also when I realized I was going to need a lab to do this research. I couldn't really do cancer research on my kitchen countertop. My mom had kind of put a ban on science in our house because of a few prior incidents. First off, what I was doing is I would take E. coli and cholera and culture them where we make sandwiches in the morning. Luckily, the CDC didn't have to be called in. There wasn't an outbreak. However, I was culturing it there because I was kind of running this genome editing program, so I'd modify the genes of these bacteria to make them do terrible things to each other, and also to make them sense biological contaminants in your water. And so I was doing a lot of cool things with these bacteria, and so I got E. coli and cholera to test these projects out. And then I had to use the stove to practice sterile technique because I wanted my bacteria to grow right. And the stove was just such a perfect place to do it. And right next to that was a great flat surface, which also happens to be where we made our sandwiches. And then also, for example, me and my brother made high voltage electronics in our basement that knocked out not only my entire development's power, it blew up the transformer in this giant explosion of fire and light, but also it knocked out my brother for 7 hours. And after that, we got banned from doing electrical engineering in our house. And I think the final straw that broke the camel's back of my mom letting us do science in our house was really when we landed her on the FBI watch list. Because of I think they kind of looked at our general online shopping history and was like, there's something bad going on there. Because first what we did is we synthesized about 1 liter of nitroglycerin on our kitchen countertop. And for those of you who don't know, nitroglycerin is a super high-powered explosive. And it's like this liquid plastic explosive, and 1 drop was enough to blow back my brother several feet. And we had 1 liter of this stuff. And to make that, we essentially made pure fuming nitric acid in a 5-gallon Gatorade container that you see at those sports games. And pure fuming nitric acid is some pretty nasty stuff. And so it started eating through this Gatorade Gatorade container because it was made out of plastic. It was oh crap, rushing around with this thing. And we also had to put gas masks on, and we kind of looked like the people from Breaking Bad because we couldn't inhale the fumes. And so it was just eating my entire porch off. And then we went over because we had to rush it over to our kitchen countertop because that, once again, our poor stove was a subject of our chemical experiments. And that's where we are doing the final distillation step and the reaction. And then we made 1 liter of this stuff, and there's still a couple chemical burns on our stovetop from that experiment. But then what happened is we had this liter, and my parents were away because they would never let us do this if they were home. And we were we have to hide the evidence, and we can't just store this somewhere. We have to get rid of it. And so we just were you know what would be a great idea? Just toss it off the back porch. That'll get rid of it naturally. It's just a small explosion. We didn't really factor in that the 1 drop had this massive shock wave. So we just tossed it off, and it left some evidence around. In fact, a 50-meter wide piece of evidence in the form of a crater that was also 3 meters deep. And that knocked out 3 trees and also extended into my neighbor's backyards. After that, our house started getting monthly searches by the FBI. But also, one thing that kind of contributed is, first off, the Andraka rocketry program that we had going on that that ignited our lawn on fire. And then also that got us to be really good friends with the fire marshal who lived next door. But also what happened is we ordered about a giant vat of uranium from a sketchy Russian website, and because we were testing out this new radiation detector, and I really don't think it was too good when they found that we were making our own centrifuges that were capable of heating to some pretty high grades of purity. And so after that, our little science experiments got shut down in our basement, and I was when it came to my mom being oh, could I do some cancer research in our basement? She's like, you must be high. I'm never letting you order anything to this house again. And so I was okay, I have to go out and find a lab to do this research. So I was this is going to be easy peasy. This is a great idea. Someone will accept me. And so I emailed 200 different professors at Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health, essentially asking, can I please work in your lab? And I attached this 30-page long procedure describing each and every aspect of the experiment, sent it out, sat back. I was waiting for all these positive emails to pour in. I'd pick and choose which lab I was in. I'd be hailed as Wonder Boy saves the world. And then reality struck. I got 199 rejections. And I realized professors aren't nearly as nice as glowing profile pictures make them seem online. They'd be all smiling in the picture, and then they'd just rip my procedure apart and my idea apart. They'd say it's this is the worst idea ever, and one of them went as far as being you should quit science now, this clearly isn't for you. And however, I kept going, and I was kind of in this like teenage rebellious streak where I was like, I'm not going to let some sour Sally PhD tell me what to do. So I went on, and I finally got one positive response from Dr. Andraka at Johns Hopkins University. And I go in, and I had to pass through like this interview first. And I go in for this big interview, and I was clad in my most professional attire of sweatpants and a hoodie. I had just come from swim practice, so my hair was a hot mess. I go in, and there's nothing like normal interview questions, like, oh, what's your favorite color? What do you want to be when you grow up? No. This guy has PhD in nanomedicine and brought 28 PhDs plus himself into this tiny, 3-meter by 3-meter room, and I'm pretty sure we set some Guinness Book of World Records for the number of people we stuffed into that room. And they proceeded to grill me for 2 hours about my each and every aspect of my procedure. And I would just kind of sat there in shock, oh my gosh, I was not prepared for this at all. Oh geez, and I just guessed on so many of their questions because my knowledge of cancer biology was a 6-month crash course that I'd given myself using Google and Wikipedia. And so I was just sitting there oh geez, I kind of recognize some of these terms, but really have no clue what these people are talking about. I guess, see, just like I did on my SATs, it got me through both of those instances. And I actually passed the interview somehow. I was just as surprised as my parents when I told them, hey, I got into a lab. And I go in the very next day because I was super excited. I got to start my experiments. And I realized I really sucked at cancer research. I was absolutely the worst. Very first day, I go in, and I was really afraid to do anything, because I was if I touch a piece of equipment, I'll probably break it, and there goes my college tuition. And so I just kind of wandered around the lab for 2 or 3 hours, until finally they're like, Jack, you actually have to do something when you're here. And so they sat me down in front of the little cell incubation, cell culturing part, and they're like, culture some cancer cells for us. And culturing cancer cells is the easiest thing in the world. You take fluid from one flask, and you put it in another flask. It's literally as simple as that. I sneezed in my second flask. Thought cancer, it's really hard to kill off. It's an immune system or something. No, there are tentacles growing out the next day, and just kind of hid it under my lab bench and kept feeding it to see how big it would get. It kind of, instead of a normal pet, like a hamster or a mouse, I had this weird abomination of bacteria and fungi growing under my lab bench. And unfortunately, I also named it. I became really close to this thing. It was called Bob, and I'd nurture it, take pictures, and post them on Facebook, just baby pictures, but with my lab baby. And then I unfortunately died when my lab professor, when my professor stumbled across it in an inspection. He's like, what on earth is this? This is a violation of every biosafety protection that we have. Get rid of it. And so Bob died in a tragic bleaching accident. However, I kept going, and I screwed up literally every single procedure I could. I'd trip over my shoelaces and blow up my cells, or blow them up in the centrifuge, or overheat them in the incubator. I killed literally so many cells. I probably committed cellular genocide on some level, but the UN hasn't been after me on that, so we're all good. But I continued on, and after 7 months of screwing up literally every single procedure, I ended up with one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run. And this makes it 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than our current methods of detection. But also, you can detect the cancer in the earliest stages, when some of us goes to 100% chance of survival, and so far is over 95% accuracy at detecting these cancers. So in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could lift the once dismal pancreatic cancer survival rates from 5.5% to close to 100%. But it'll do more, because you can also detect ovarian cancer and lung cancer with this and have similar results. And also, by switching out the antibody, as simple as switching out chocolate chips for butterscotch chips and cookies, you can detect an entirely different disease. So you can detect things ranging from Alzheimer's, other forms of cancer, even HIV, AIDS, and heart disease. The possibilities are literally endless. And nowadays, I'm out at Stanford. I continue doing research on this paper sensor, and we're trying to get to market. Also, I've picked up a bunch of different other projects that I'm doing. So the first of which is I'm working on this thing where essentially turn your cell phone into your own personal doctor, because what we can do is I essentially create a piece of paper the size of a postage stamp that detects 28 different diseases simultaneously. And then you snap a picture of it and text it or put it into this app that I created. And so you can text it to this number, and then the server will automatically analyze all the data on this piece of paper, and then it will text you back your diagnosis, and it will also then geotag and timestamp that data point. So you can actually do real-time epidemiology. So for example, in the Ebola outbreak, I would be able to tell you exactly where the Ebola was and exactly where it would probably be going in the next few days. And so then you can deploy resources optimally to treat these epidemics. But also what you can do is we've been using this for environmental monitoring, where essentially we also are able to detect 28 different water contaminants simultaneously, all for less than a single, all for less than 1/1000th of a penny. And that's what the cost of each of these sensors is. You do the same thing, take a picture, text to this app, and then you can instantly get these results, and it will geotag and timestamp all the data points. And then what happens is we can actually use these smart algorithms and tell you exactly where certain contaminants are coming from, and then institute these policies in order to protect the environment. And so we implemented this in Tanzania, in this mining district, and we were able to collect over 500,000 data points in less than 3 months, and able to hold 100 polluting mine companies accountable, and be able to essentially find people clean drinking water in the process. And then my second project are these little things I call nano robots. And these are essentially very small robots that I programmed using DNA. And each one is about the size of 1/1000th of a piece of your hair. So extremely, extremely small. And I program them using DNA, and they'll go in and they'll find your cancer, kind of like heat-seeking missiles. And they'll only go straight to your cancer cells. And then what will happen is they'll actually go and learn with your cancer as it develops resistances to certain drugs. And will personalize your cancer treatment over time, such that it's the best possible cancer treatment for you. And so it can calculate the optimal dosages for 5 different chemotherapy drugs, all while in your bloodstream. And then what happens is, over time, let's say your cancer starts getting resistance to one of the drugs that it's using. Then what it can do is it can actually genetically modify your cancer cells to get rid of that resistance, such that the cancer is susceptible to that treatment once again. But also what it can do, I kind of feel like a car salesman being like, but wait, there's more. Essentially what it can do is can do all sorts of genome engineering. So actually what we've been able to do is go into people's immune cells, knock out this one certain gene that's kind of implicated in diabetes type 1, and then we're able to insert these insulin-producing cells back into your pancreas, and they're not attacked anymore. So then diabetes patients can once again produce insulin. So these are super, super exciting preliminary results. But also, what you can do with these is they're kind of like a tiny biological computer, because just 1 milliliter of them has the same computing power as your iPhone. And so there's all sorts of really interesting applications where essentially I can turn your blood into a computer that will proactively go and get rid of diseases before you even have them. And so those are the 2 kind of research projects that I'm working on right now. However, throughout this entire journey, I ran into a lot of different hurdles. I mean, my parents rejected my ideas, my bio teacher told me no, and 199 professors told me no as well. But at least they didn't tell me to make a paper mache volcano for my science fair project. However, really the greatest hurdle that I had throughout this entire journey was that of scientific paywalls. You see, this is essentially where you have to cough up $35 per article in order to read it. And this exponentially increases the cost of doing research, because for every single article that you read, which you need to do in order to get the knowledge to do your research, you have to cough up $35, and that adds up super, super fast. And this especially impacts young researchers such as myself, because I gotta admit, my $5 allowance isn't really cutting it for buying scientific articles. And we kind of have this kind of disparity where we have all these big STEM initiatives that say we need more kids interested in science, But then when a seminal science article costs $35 and a Katy Perry single costs 99 cents, it's a bit of a mixed message. And this doesn't just impact 15-year-old cancer researchers, this impacts everyone. You see, recently, Harvard University released a statement to its faculty and students saying, we simply can't afford to continue paying for our subscription. They're too expensive. Some of them are $400,000 or $40,000 per year. That's really just ridiculous and intuitively expensive. And by having these paywalls, we've really created this class hierarchy in terms of knowledge. Where at the top, we have the knowledge elite, these big name institutions like Harvard, MIT, and Yale that can afford all these different articles and all these different subscriptions. But even among the knowledge elite, we have a bit of stratification. Where at the top, we have this big name institutions, Harvard, Yale, MIT, and Stanford, but then lower down we have state-run institutions that don't have as large of endowments and thus can't afford the same access to articles as these big name institutions. And so basically what we have is this tier-based dissemination of knowledge, and it simply isn't working and it's counterproductive to science. But then lower down, we have the knowledge middle class. People like you or me, who can access the few open access articles out there and maybe buy an abstract here and there. But really what's happening here is we're discriminating your access to scientific knowledge based on how much money you or your institution has. But then lower down, we have the knowledge underclass. Those 5.5 billion people who lack access to the internet and thus are living in knowledge poverty and can't contribute to scientific research whatsoever. We're basically throwing away 85% of the world's human capital just because they don't have internet and we're not willing to give it to them. And so what we're living in is a knowledge aristocracy, where only 0.008% of the world's population, those are the only people who can access scientific knowledge. So that's like taking 80 people off the streets of Mexico City and saying, you guys are the only people in the city that can access scientific information. Everyone else, too bad for you. And by having this, we've really created this disparity where 85% of the world's population isn't contributing.